A child is not aware of that. Therefore, how do we say we universally agree on things and therefore use that to argue that we must be born with this knowledge? Also, in this middle bullet or bullet point, the laws of non-contradiction, that not every law, and he uses the example of an idea that was common in Britain at the time, which was saying what is simply that. What is, which means if something is blue, it really is blue. There's no questioning it. There's no other way around it. So if we believe that, he argues that not everyone has those ideas and identity are not universally acknowledged. In Kenya, as I like to give the example of Kenya, the law cannot claim, he argues, that there's a universal acknowledgement. Therefore, essentially, no one is born with ideas. The ideas are went on to say what ideas are and where they come from. Now we want to know if ideas come. He says that all ideas come from sensation or reflection. And as you can see, is what you feel, right? You and I know from experience that you cannot touch a flame because we've touched a flame before. We know that it's hot. We know it's going to burn your fingers. You and I can look outside a window and know that it's cold today and decide to wear a jersey because we've seen and it snowed for 7 months of the year. We knew from experience, from our senses, having seen snow before, having experienced snow before, I could look out my window and see that it's snowing and know that I needed to wear my thermal jacket. Ideas as well as ours of our. Now, because of how we are socialized, because of our experiences, when you get into an argument, say, or you read in order to focus on my studies, all of that comes from the operations of your mind, which are coming from your experiences. If you had not experienced how social media can waste your time, is unsafe at night, you wouldn't know to have an understanding in a certain way, and that forms the operations of our mind. But these are not ideas we were born with. These are ideas that we have come to know through experience, through, again, our society. I'm reiterating this point so that it makes sense. And I'm also going to make the essay available, John Locke's essay, so that you may read it and make sense of it, highlight what needs to be highlighted as you read, and send me a message on WhatsApp with your questions. It concludes that all of our ideas are a source of our sensation as well as our reflection, the paper that is waiting to be written upon. As such, I want you to ponder upon this question. In the regularly had debate of nurture versus nature, which side would Locke take, and why is that? Now, I'm hoping that you are familiar, or you would have heard before, of the argument of nurture versus nature. Nurture is how you are nurtured, how you grow, how you are shaped as a child, how you are raised. Whereas nature is the natural state of being, something that exists in its original form. It's not been influenced in any way. So if John Locke were here today and this debate was going on, perhaps let's we talked about in the previous lecture, violence in our schools. Is that an argument of nature that perhaps South African children are born violent? Or is it an argument of nurture that they are raised or they are socialized in a way that leads them to know and act that the inhabitants of Southern Africa prior to colonization were? So they were the steadfast or the sun, like myself, the male others in the class. The sun were hunter-gatherers. They did not own livestock. The Khoi were hunter-gatherers who also had livestock. Livestock was very important to them. And then there were the Bantu. Now, when I talk about pre-colonial South Africa in this lecture, I'm not going to break it down and show you this is the way the San had their education. The inhabitants of Southern Africa or South Africa prior to colonization. So I'm going to be generic in the examples I use. You might find that there's one that relates to the San and does not relate to the Bantu. Okay, so there was another point I wanted to make at this point, but we move on. I will remember and I'll come back to it. Okay, so I'm gonna go back. Yes. What is your understanding? I want you to think about this before we move on to the next slide. What is your understanding of education in pre-colonial South Africa? Because when Europeans in libraries account that Africans were uneducated, that Africans were savage prior to the arrival of Europeans. What is your view on that? And I'd like to know, at the end of this lecture, has your view changed? So perhaps we can have that discussion after you've watched the lecture. Now, as you all were uneducated, or that the only education that was in Africa was the education that was introduced by Europeans, is false, is Eurocentric, and it is, a colonizer's mentality would have, so yes, there was definitely a thrust in South Africa prior to the arrival of Europeans. So now, as we've discussed before, what was the purpose of education then historically? And what is the purpose of education today? We've talked about it. We get educated so that we can participate in the economy. We get educated so that we can be full functioning members of our society and work towards improving humanity. Right. Now, in pre-colonial times,